Today we're going to be counting down the toughest Springbok rugby team of all time. We've been through the dirtiest team of all time, the greatest team. Now we're going to do the toughest team. No better place to start than number one, loosehead prop, and the stalwart of 2 World Cups, one of the toughest guys in world rugby, one of the strongest guys in world rugby. Interesting story about, well, I'll tell you who it is for starters, is Mr. Oostirand, 2-time Rugby World Cup winner, long career, storied career, hard man. Very, very seldomly saw anybody ever get the better of Oostirand in the scrum, and one-on-one with 5 meters to go, you can put the house on Aussie winning it. Interestingly enough, I was at the pub the other day and I was chatting to a guy. He looked about the same size as Oostirand, probably about 120 kilos, 6'3", big farming type guy. And he was saying he was in the Free State once, and he was in a pub, and this woman said she'd challenge anybody to an arm wrestling competition. And every dude in the pub wrestled her and lost, including this guy who was a big dude. And it turned out that was Oostirand's sister, who was stronger than any man in a Free State pub, which is good enough for Aussie to get number one on the toughest Bok team of all time. And then at number 2, hooker position is probably arguably the position that has the toughest players, but you're stuck in the middle of the scrum. It's a very dangerous position, and you've often expected to be a bit of a rough diamond, able to handle yourself and be a bit of an enforcer. And probably the toughest guy I saw on the rugby field was Mr. Uli Schmidt, who was a Springbok in the 1980s and early 90s. Missed out on a lot of rugby because of apartheid, but was golden boy of Blue Bulls rugby, hard as nails. A bit like Richie McCaw, lived on the edge of legality, but very, very hard dude. Played well into his 30s and very ultra reliable. Just a good old school pro. And number 3, veteran of 117 tests for South Africa. You don't get to 117 tests without being a tough SOB. Similar to Os, very seldomly saw anybody get the upper hand on him in the scrums, and nobody ever caused shit with Beast, Tendai and Tarawera, who comes in at number 3 on the list. Solid as old boots, great athlete. Seen him streaking down the wing a few times, but ultimately a very, very tough guy. And Uli Schmidt, Oostirand, and Beast in the front row is a formidable front row that nobody's going to try and get the better of in terms of physicality. Special mention would have to go in with Malcolm Marx at 2, also another incredibly strong, fearsome character, but Uli Schmidt, master of the dark arts, in at number 2. Number 4 picks himself. He's getting in quite a few of my teams. Is Bakkies Botha, veteran of 85 tests, very, very tough player. He could shell it out and take it. And you don't get to 85 tests at number 4, locking position, the enforcer role, without being tough as old tackies. Interestingly enough, if I've got Bakkies at 4, I can afford to play Earman at 5 and more of the flair locking position, 5 as a jumper. Let Bakkies do all the hard work, and then Earman can express himself a bit, because often he has to play that enforcer role. So let's see the athletic Earman come through, and when we need a bit of extra muscle, when the Kiwis or the Aussies are getting a bit too ahead of themselves, 2 enforcers are better than 1. Then at number 6, blindside fetcher. This is a bit of a controversial one, because Frick de Preer played quite a bit of his career at lock, but at 6'2", 106 kilos, you're just not big enough to play modern day lock. But he was such a fantastic player, voted one of the best Springboks of all time. He is still good enough to make it in at number 6. Very athletic player. I think he'd do quite well in the fetcher role with those big mitts wrestling for the ball. Number 7, rest in peace. One of the hardest players to ever put on a Springbok rugby jersey. 1995 Rugby World Cup winner, Mr. Ruben Kruger, no nonsense, does all the hard work behind the scenes, good ball carrier as well. Just a good, honest pro, world-class pro. And then at 8th man has got to be Thor, Dwayne Vermeulen, the toughest rugby player I've seen in a long, long time. He got dumped on his head by 2 props in the Rugby World Cup and carried on playing the full 80 minutes. This guy seems to be impervious to pain and must have a neck like a tree stump to get away with all this sort of neck and back trauma that these players put them through. In his younger days, he had good pace, but his hardness and ability to take pain and be in those uncomfortable positions gets him in at number 8. Special mention at 8 for Morné du Plessis, who wasn't the biggest guy in the world. He had height, but not in terms of bulk, but he could dish it out and take it. He got a few wallopings in the Lions tour when they came out here, but got his own back on Nasty Bass in a separate game, flattened him coming off the back of the scrum. But Dwayne is still the toughest dude I have seen at 8th man. So summing up the pack, we got Aussie at 1, Uli Schmidt 2, Beast at 3. That's a hell of a front row. And then at 4, the toughest locking pairing I could come up with was Buckies and Urban. Urban didn't make my dirty list because he's cleaned up his act in the last few years, but in terms of toughness, he's right up there. 6, Frick de Preer, 7, Ruben Kruger, and 8, Dwayne Vermeulen. Then at number 9, this was quite an easy one in terms of toughness. Anybody that can tackle Jonah Lomu in a Rugby World Cup final, that's good enough for me at scrum half. Mr. Joos van der Verstays, and rest in peace, the golden boy of South African rugby in the 1990s, World Cup winner in 95. Fantastic on defence, hard as nails, would be prepared to tackle anybody, and was quite successful at it most of the time. Joos van der Verstays, and comes in at number 9 on the toughest Bork team of all time. Number 10 was really, really easy for me. After fly halves like Gerald Bosch and Joel Stransky, who weren't the most physical in defence, somebody like Henry Honeyball came along, and not many people wanted to be running up his line. Extremely hard tackler, good ball carrier, and had a bit of pace in his younger years. Not a dirty player, but really, really hard. Henry Honeyball, I would almost, instead of Frick de Preer, I would make him the captain, Henry Honeyball, because he epitomizes toughness and fairness on the rugby field. And then left wing was a difficult one for me because I got 2 right wings that I really want in this side. So Neil Berger's going to have to play on the left wing. Western Province winger from the 90s. Very, very sensational in Currie Cup rugby. Got a lot of important tries. Thick, stocky, 100-kilo guy. Sort of almost in the Lomu-esque stage before Lomu was even a thing. He would run over people rather than run around them. And he had the gas to step around them as well. Mr. Neil Berger at left wing.
Dit is Rian Potgieter en Neil Berger sleep visie.
Then at inside centre, it's a pretty easy one. One of the first big centres in rugby in Springbok circles, Mr. John Gainsford, 6'1", pushing 100 kilo, Western Province, his favourite child, terrorising defence. He could play wing or centre, and is my pick at number 12. Then at outside centre is quite an easy selection. One of the darlings of South African rugby and one of the toughest men to ever put on a Springbok jersey, Mr. Dani Gerber, Eastern Cape's favourite son. Scored a bucket load of tries for the Boks. Eastern Cape. He was one of the first big centres, 95 kilos, which was quite big for those times, over 6 foot, and used to terrorise defences, along with right wing for my toughest Bork side of all time. This was quite an easy one as well. Mr. Rainwater, real man's man, big dude, pushing 100 kilos, which was big for the 80s, incredibly quick stepping, fantastic wing three-quarter, Mr. Ray Morton, would have played a lot more rugby if he'd been able to. Which brings us into somebody that did play a lot of rugby, a lot of important rugby, especially in 1995, with a broken hand, Mr. Andre Joubert, the Rolls Royce. I mean, how's this for a back three? You got Neil Berger at left wing, Ray Morton at right wing, and Andre Joubert, tough as old boots at fullback and a lot of flair. And then in the centres you got John Gainsford and Donnie Gerber. So this is a really, really sexy side with Henry Honeyball and Yost getting the back line going. I mean, does it get any better than that? Let's go through my toughest book team of all time. Oosterhuis, Uli Schmidt, Beast at prop. Urban and Bucky's at lock. Frick Dupree, Ruben Kruger and Dwayne Vermeulen in the loose forwards. Yost and Henry Honeyball at fly half. Neil Berger left wing, Johns Gainsford inside centre, outside centre, Donnie Gerber, Raymond right wing, and Andre Joubert. Sure, might be it's the toughest South African team in my book, and might well be one of the most talented teams. This team would take a lot of beating, and would my all-time team would actually struggle to beat this side. And then on the bench we have Mr. Bismarck du Plessis, who's covering at hooker, tough as all nails, 115 kilo, pushing 120 kilo. You can see he had a big older brother who's used to getting knocked around a bit because he can give it, and was really instrumental in many a book victory. And then we need something a little bit old school, a little bit nuggety from the Western Province in the early 90s, Mr. Keith Andrews, who was coming out swinging in the Battle of Tukuman. And then second prop would be Barley Swart. He played well almost into his 40s. He would have sort of one half and then get taken off. One of the best technical scrummagers of all time in South Africa, and just really a rough and robust player. And then for the covering on number 19 replacement, covering the loosies, we've got the Kalahari Boerseun, Mr. Tion Strauss, who apparently used to go on the back of a motorbike, get driven, and then jump off the bike and tackle wild animals on his farm to practice his tackling. Very, very tough and courageous player, and was unlucky not to captain South Africa during the 1995 World Cup. And our second loose forward replacement in the toughest Springbok team of all time is Mr. Vol Bartman, who won the Currie Cup with Natal in the 90s, breaking quite a long dry spell for that province. Really, not the prettiest guy in the world, but tough as old boots. Probably one of the hardest loose forwards I've seen ever. You could run through a brick wall and just keep on going out the other side. And then in terms of backline replacements, we've got one of the smallest guys in the team, but in terms of stature, not in terms of strength, is Nuggety scrum half, Mr. Faf du Klerk. He will back down to nobody, and really an asset to any team. And rounding out my toughest box side of all time is quite a flair player, but he's another small guy that always punches above his weight, Mr. Cheslin Colby, Rugby World Cup winner, currently the best winger in the world. In terms of coach, you got to have somebody charismatic and tough, and this is an easy one, Mr. Kitch Christie. With his leadership, this team would be very hard to beat. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know what you think, comments and queries. Subscribe, like, and all that good stuff. If there's any rugby topics you want me to look at, I'll be having some more motoring content coming your way, so keep it peeled, keep it stum. Catch you next time, Africa Sideways.